You know what? I've heard rumors that they're going to get Pierce Brosnan to reprise the role.
No one's spoken to me about it. I've heard all the rumors, and listen, they know where to find.
Pierce Brosnan, the man who once embodied the unshakable elegance of James Bond in the legendary film GoldenEye, has been admired for decades, not only for the place he holds in cinematic history, but for the calm dignity with which he has endured a lifetime of storms. He has stood beside graves no husband or father should ever have to face, yet each time he emerged with strength, pride, and a heart still willing to love. He held the hand of his first wife, Cassandra Harris, as ovarian cancer claimed her life at just 43, and years later, he endured the same merciless disease, taking his daughter Charlotte at 41, tearing away another piece of his soul. Now at 71, he faces an even darker struggle, one that threatens the very heart of his world, leaving those closest to him deeply concerned. His story of grief began in Ireland, born in 1953 in Drogheda to a carpenter father who disappeared before Pierce was old enough to remember him, and a mother who left for London when he was 4, leaving him to drift between relatives until she returned 7 years later. His stepfather, William Carmichael, brought kindness and stability, and it was William who took Pierce to see Goldfinger in 1964, sparking the dream that would change his life. By 16, Pierce pursued art at St. Martin's School, never imagining a future in acting until a chance encounter in 1971 with a fire eater led into theater and eventually the Drama Centre London, where he endured grueling training that forged his craft. Inch by inch, he built his career, from minor film roles to the television breakthrough Remington Steele in 1982, which made him a household name and, almost instantly, a candidate for James Bond. Twice fate denied him the role, but in 1994 the call finally came, and with GoldenEye he not only revived a fading franchise, but redefined Bond for a new era. 4 films followed, grossing over $1 billion, before he was abruptly dismissed in 2004 with a curt phone call that ended his tenure as 007. Yet even as his career soared, his private life bore unimaginable pain. Cassandra, the elegant actress he married in 1980, the woman who brought him love, home, and family, fell ill in 1987, beginning 4 years of relentless surgeries and chemotherapy. Pierce called himself her quiet partner, always by her side, holding her hand as their young son Sean played doctor with plastic stethoscopes, trying to heal what could not be healed. On December 28, 1991, just a day after their 11th wedding anniversary, Cassandra passed away, leaving him to raise her 2 children, Charlotte and Christopher, and their son Sean alone. Grief rooted itself into every corner of his life, carried silently even during his Bond years, until 22 years later returned in the cruelest way. Charlotte, radiant and resilient, developed the same cancer that had taken her mother. At just 40, the first signs appeared in Pierce, haunted by the rhythm he knew too well. Braced for the inevitable, she met her illness with the same courage Cassandra had, but in 2013, at only 41, she too was gone. For Pierce Brosnan, the man the world saw as untouchable, the wounds of his life have never fully healed, and behind the tuxedo and the cinematic legacy is a father, a husband, and a son who has carried grief with grace, proving that resilience is not about being unbreakable, but about continuing to love despite the breaks. For years, she endured surgeries, rounds of chemotherapy, and a long purgatory of waiting rooms, places that smelled of antiseptic and resignation. Each treatment stole more of her strength, yet her resolve burned on. Her anchor was her 2 children, Isabella, 15, and Lucas, 8, watching her fade just as she had once watched Cassandra. It was a cruel mirror image history, looping with surgical precision. She refused pity, asking only for time. Time to show her children that love could outlast pain. Time to leave them with memories of courage rather than sickness. So in June 2013, with the cancer advancing like a tide that could not be turned, she did something extraordinary. She put on a white dress, stood tall against the weight of her failing body, and married Alex, the man who had stood unwavering beside her. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a final stand, a declaration that love would have the last word. She smiled through the pain, her hands trembling, her eyes bright with both joy and the unspoken knowledge of what was to come. 2 weeks later, on June 28, 2013, she was gone. It was a quiet Friday in London that carved itself into Pierce's bones. Charlotte passed surrounded by her husband, her children, and her brothers, Christopher and Sean. And there it was, the cruel symmetry almost too exact to bear. Charlotte died at 41, Cassandra at 43. Lucas was 8, the same age Sean had been when Cassandra died. Isabella was 15, the same age Charlotte had been when her mother's illness was first revealed. It was as if grief had a blueprint, returning to etch the same wounds at the same ages with surgical cruelty. Once more, Pierce stood in the place no parent should ever be, bearing a child, burying a future. He tried to be strong for his grandchildren, but some pain defies language. It is not cinematic. It is not poetic. It is a hollowing silence that seeps into the marrow and steals the shape of the days to come. In 2014, at a Stand Up to Cancer fundraiser, the spotlight found him. It did not glamorize. It exposed. His voice was steady, but each word carried the weight of decades carved by loss. I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie, as ovarian cancer took her life much too soon, he said. And just last year, I held the hand of my funny, wonderful daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched, inherited disease. The room went still. There was nothing to add. Some grief doesn't fade. It multiplies, echoing across time, embedding itself into every breath. Pierce Brosnan does not wear that pain as a badge. It has become part of his very structure, woven into him as unyielding, as unshakable, and as permanent as bone. He had thought Charlotte's death was a final blow, that after losing both his wife and his daughter to the same merciless illness, there was nothing left for life to take. The symmetry of their departures, years apart but bound by the same cruel disease, had left him hollow. There are some losses that feel like a theft, and others that feel like the ground itself has been erased from under you. He had endured both. And yet, through all this heartbreak, just when it seemed the weight of loss might break him for good, there was Keely, the woman he met in 1994 in the unlikeliest of settings, a beach party in Cabo San Lucas. It was just months before he would officially become James Bond, but fame wasn't what defined him in that moment. He was still a man living in quiet grief, not seeking romance, just trying to keep moving forward. She wasn't part of the past. She was his future, his survival, his second chance. Keely was a journalist, warm, wise, uninterested in the spotlight. She saw not the tuxedoed icon or the rising Bond star, but the man who still carried silences too heavy to name. And he saw in her a stillness he hadn't known in years. In those early days, she didn't try to erase his grief or force joy into spaces where it didn't belong. She simply stayed through sleepless nights, through anniversaries that felt like open wounds. She stayed. When Charlotte fell ill nearly 2 decades later, dragging Pierce back into the echo of his first great loss, Keely became his shield. She held the house together. She held him together, and she held space for his pain without demanding he put it into words. They married in 2001 in an 800-year-old abbey, surrounded by friends, family, and a kind of beauty that makes time feel momentarily still. For him, that day was more than a celebration. It was a declaration that despite everything he had lost, love still had a place in his life. It was the beginning of a chapter where he could be a father again, this time to the 2 children they would have together, Dylan and Paris. In them, he found, not a replacement for what was gone, but a continuation of his role as a parent, a role that had always defined him more deeply than any film could. Keely's love was not loud or showy. It was in the way she made birthdays a priority, in how she filled the house with warmth so that laughter could still echo even on the hardest days. It was in the way she never asked him to get over it, but instead helped him live alongside the absence. When Charlotte passed away in 2013, Keely was there, steady and unyielding, protecting the fragile threads of a family that had already been through too much. She didn't try to replace what had been lost. She became the anchor that kept him from drifting entirely into grief. Over the years, the outside world would turn its gaze on him in ways that were not always kind. After the births of their children, tabloids targeted Keely's appearance with relentless scrutiny. But Pierce never wavered. He defended her openly and fiercely, dismissing the criticism and speaking instead of the beauty he saw. I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes. That steadfast loyalty was the same he had shown in every part of his life. It was simply who he was. In 2024, at the age of 61, after a decade of enduring the glare of public judgment, Keely made headlines of her own, not for her appearance in the eyes of others, but for a deeply personal transformation. She lost over 100 pounds, not as an answer to criticism, but as a gift to her own health. "My body has survived love, children, and sorrow," she wrote. "Now I honor it by moving forward stronger." For Pierce, this was no revelation. He had always known her strength. The world was simply seeing what he had cherished all along. He has often said, "She saved me. She gave me the will to keep going." In her, he didn't find an escape from grief, but the endurance to live with it, not a distraction from the past, but meaning in the present. After all the roles he had played, Bond, Remington Steele, action heroes, tragic lovers, the greatest role he grew into was one she helped him embrace: husband, father, survivor. Even now, when he speaks of Cassandra or Charlotte, his voice lowers, his gaze drifts. There are absences time cannot fill. The loss is not something he has ever moved on from. It is something he carries silently every day. But in Keely, he found a place to set that weight down when it became too heavy, a soft landing after a lifetime of free falls. She never tried to fill the silence left by those who were gone. She simply taught him how to live with it, how to find joy again, even if it trembled at the edges. And through every high and low, she stayed. That, more than anything else, has been the quiet miracle of his life. He had weathered storms most men could never imagine, buried the love of his life, stood helpless as his daughter fought the same merciless illness, rebuilt himself from grief again and again. He thought he understood loss, but nothing prepared him for quiet, calculated betrayal that came not from strangers, but from the very institution he had helped revive. After 4 blockbuster Bond films, after GoldenEye resurrected a fading franchise and re-established 007 as a global force, after risking his body in dangerous stunts and carrying the weight of an iconic legacy with unwavering loyalty, Pierce Brosnan believed he had earned his place in that tuxedo for years to come. Then, in 2004, while filming in the Bahamas, phone rang. The call lasted just 47 seconds. No warning, no conversation, no gratitude. Only a voice on the other end saying, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The line went dead, and with it, the chapter that had defined a professional life. What hurt most wasn't losing the role. It was learning the truth afterward. For 2 years, producers had been auditioning his replacement in secret, letting him believe the future was still as even as they prepared his exit. It was a wound deeper than a lost job. It was a shattering of trust. In the days that followed, the consequences hit, like falling dominoes. 3 major film deals vanished almost overnight. His value in Hollywood collapsed. His salary offers plummeting from $12 million to just $3 million. Studios began labeling him too Bond, an image so iconic it now became a prison, locking him out of roles instead of opening doors. The impact was brutal and swift. He was forced to let go of 12 loyal staff members. The man who had stood unshaken through personal tragedy now found himself drowning in a different kind of grief, the grief of erasure. This wasn't a headline or a press release. This was waking up each morning feeling as though the world had moved on and left him behind. For a man whose identity had been forged in survival, this loss didn't just bruise. It broke something fundamental. His son would later recall catching him in tears when the trailer for Casino Royale was released. It wasn't envy. It wasn't anger. It was a hollow ache, the kind that comes when you see someone else wearing the life you had built, and realizing it's gone forever is its own kind of loss. In later interviews, Brosnan would recall that period as one of the darkest stretches of his life, not because James Bond had ended for him, but because with it went a sense of purpose, the anchor that had given him meaning after so much personal tragedy. When survival has been your defining role, every loss carries the echo of all the others, and for Pierce Brosnan, this felt like losing everything all over again. Not every kind of grief is marked by black clothes and a graveside. Some unfold slowly and invisibly, until you realize someone you love has been slipping away in plain sight. For Brosnan, that grief came through Christopher, Cassandra's son from her first marriage, whom Pierce had adopted, loved, and raised as his own. Their bond had been instant and real, built on film sets, family routines, and laughter. But after Cassandra's death, something fractured. Charlotte held the pieces together with grace. Sean leaned on Pierce for strength, but Christopher grieved inwardly, quietly, and heavily, until addiction crept in. What began in shadows grew harder to hide. Legal troubles, near misses, moments when his life hung in the balance. Pierce tried everything a father could: rehab, long talks, countless chances, even silent presence. Yet love alone could not rescue someone unwilling to be saved. In a rare confession, he admitted, "Christopher is still very lost. I know where he is, but he's having a hard life. He knows how to get out. He doesn't want to." There was no anger in his voice, only the ache of father forced to step back, not to sever ties, never stop loving, but to love from a distance. Years passed, and Christopher faded from view. When he reappeared, older and frilier, it was another kind of funeral, one without a ceremony. To lose a child to death is an agony no parent should face, but to lose him to life while they still walk the earth is its own quiet devastation. Brosnan has never turned this pain into spectacle. Yet on Father's Day 2022, he posted a rare message including Christopher's name, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The love never left and never will, because some goodbyes aren't spoken. They are lived in silence, in distance, in unshakable hope that one day the story isn't over. For Brosnan, life now is less about box office numbers than about meaning. After decades scarred by loss, upheaval, and grief that could hollow out even the strongest hearts, he chose not retreat but renewal, building a life centered on family, painting, and advocacy. With Keely, his partner since 1994 and wife since 2001, he has created a sanctuary in Malibu and Kauai, homes filled with art, gardens, laughter, and the horizon he calls his source of calm. Together they raised Dylan and Paris, watched Sean grow, cherished Charlotte's children Isabella and Lucas, and despite distance, held on to love for Christopher. At 72, he balances discipline and gratitude, morning swims, yoga, long walks, and a diet rooted in simplicity, not for vanity, but to sustain the energy needed for his family and causes. Creativity still fuels him. Selective acting roles, but mostly painting, a therapy he turned to during Cassandra's illness, now a passion exhibited for charity. Financially secure, his focus is not accumulation, but contribution. UNICEF, Greenpeace, NRDC, cancer awareness, all part of a legacy rooted in love, resilience, and service. Though Cassandra and Charlotte remain absences that have never healed, Keely has helped him weave grief into a life where sorrow and joy can coexist. Time has marked him. Silver hair, a slower stride, but not diminish him. They are simply the proof of a life fully lived. Looking ahead, there are still scripts waiting, paintings unfinished, family trips to take. His most enduring legacy will not be a tuxedoed secret agent nor fortune, but the resilience he modeled, transforming loss into art, advocacy, and love. He once summed it up simply, "Life has to go on, and if it does, you better find something worth living for." For Pierce Brosnan, that something is no longer escaping danger on screen, but confronting real ones, protecting family, planet, and hope itself. That may be the greatest lesson of his journey. Even after the harshest losses, love and purpose can carry us forward.